Hi there, Wendy McClelland here. This video I've been meaning to make for a while, but I wasn't quite ready. But I'm ready now. I was a Christian for over 50 years of my life. I've been an atheist for a little over a year. And I wanted to share that journey and how I evolved, if you want to use that word, into an atheist from someone who truly believed that Christ was my personal savior. I grew up in the church. I grew up in an Anglican church. My parents took me to Sunday school and church every week. I was in the church choir. And we went to a Christian summer camp every year as a family. Now, Anglicans are like the Church of England in the UK. And I always said it's kind of like watered down Catholic because we did pray for the Pope and we did have some of the symbology and traditions of the Catholic Church in our worship. In my late teens, like many teenagers, I wandered away from the church and I decided, I'm going to just turn my back on this for a while. But man, I felt guilt. You know, when you go to a party and you have too much to drink and you're underage, or, you make out with a boyfriend in the backseat of a car, the guilt sets in big time. In my early 20s, as I was preparing to get married, I felt like God was calling me back. I truly did. And so I started reading my Bible again. I started praying on a regular basis. And when I had children, my ex-husband wasn't a religious man and didn't really stop me from taking the kids to church, but didn't really want them to go. So I didn't want to have that argument. So I just kind of left it. But I talked to God and talked about God to my kids all the time. In fact, we used to have a list on our fridge of things to ask God when we get to heaven, things that we didn't understand. And so when one of the kids would come home and ask me a question that I went, wow, that's really tough to answer. Why would God let that happen? Or how does that occur? We would put on our list of things to ask God when we get to heaven. And when my marriage ended, I was just broken. It was unexpected for me. I was left with 3 small children. I always thought I would be married to my husband forever. So I was lost. And the one thing that I thought would give me a grounding again would be my faith. So I searched for a new church. And the community I lived in had dozens of churches. So I actually found a Mennonite Brethren church. A couple of people had mentioned it to me. So I started going there. And this was quite a I guess you would say a fundamentalist belief system church. So, homosexuality is wrong, love the sinner, not the sin. Women were not leaders in the church, but they did have a women's pastor. So they were a little bit progressive in that way. And it was a lovely church. I loved the people there. I loved my experiences there. People say, oh, you must have left because you were hurt by the church. Never happened for me. And I was part of the single parents group in that church for over a year. They, in fact, met at my house every week for a year. But I found that every time a new person would come into the group and share their pain and their sorrow of losing their marriage, it would take me back to that place where I had been, and I was trying to move forward. So I stopped having that group in my home, and I stopped going to the group. And over the next 15 years or so, I went to church sporadically. I started to feel that the church was not connected to the values that I held, that everyone is equal, everyone has a right to the same human rights as everybody else. And this church clearly did not. The people were very loving. They never were cruel or mean, but it was a real struggle for me. So I would pray on my own, at least 2 or 3 times a day, read Bible stories to my kids, took them to church occasionally. And once my kids grew up, I still had what I felt was a rich spiritual life. I still had what Christians would say is a personal relationship with Christ. People would say, oh, you're so religious. And I would go, no, I'm not religious at all. I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the difference between religion and Christianity. And I always felt Christianity was special, as all Christians do and as all Muslims do about Islam. They feel it's special. So about 3 years ago, things started to really change for me. I had been observing things that were happening in the United States in terms of Christians, fundamentalism, and it was scaring me. I live in Canada. We don't have the really strong fundamentalist block of people that you do in the United States if you're watching this from the US. But I was just disgusted by what I was seeing. The abuse and the vitriol and the hatred toward people that were different. I couldn't handle it. And I had been working with refugees, actually, and some of them were Muslims, some were Christian, some were non-believers. And the things that I was seeing about, especially what Islam and Muslim believers, was so disheartening as it came from the Christian church, and things against homosexuals and treatment of them. And I just thought, I can't be associated with this anymore. So in 2014, I wrote a Facebook post on Easter called "A Crisis of the Faithful," and it wasn't a crisis of my faith; it was a crisis in my faith in the people who called themselves Christians. And I had so much response from that it really started me thinking, do I want to be known as someone who is associated with this kind of ugliness? The second thing on my step to becoming an atheist was about 2 years ago. A friend of mine had a baby at 26 weeks, very early. The normal pregnancy is 40 weeks. Baby was born very small, pound to pound, touch and go for months and months and months. And this mom asked, she was a Christian, would people pray? And would we put this baby on prayer chains? I did. I prayed every day for this baby. And I would watch the updates and share the updates with my followers on Facebook, and I put her on prayer chains. And one morning I woke up and I realized, oh my gosh, I forgot to pray. Oh, and then I had the question hit my head, how many prayers are enough? What if we all forgot to pray last night, or half of us forgot to pray? Could one prayer have made a difference? Would this baby die if one person forgot to pray? And I started thinking even deeper. If this baby was born in Haiti, on a First Nations reserve somewhere in North America, Rwanda, a poor part of the world, maybe North Korea, she would have died. Yet those parents would have feverishly prayed and begged and hoped and wished that their baby would live just as much as my friend and her husband did. Then the question comes, does God love white babies more? Does God only save those babies in the West? I started thinking, no, God had nothing to do with saving this baby. This baby survived and is thriving now because she got the very best state-of-the-art medical care in a Western hospital. That's the only reason this baby lived. Had nothing to do with any God. The third step in my deconversion was reading the Bible, this Bible. I actually went and bought a brand new Bible. If any of you've ever gone to a Christian bookstore, you've probably seen these lovely little tabs that they have that you can stick on every book of the Bible. I organized it. When I do a project, any kind, whether it's for work or something like this, I like to be organized. So I put tabs on each book of the Bible, and I started reading at the beginning. And as I read, I then went to the internet, and I would compare historical texts and archaeological evidence and historical information about the events that were supposedly happening in the Bible. I want you to take a look at the top of this Bible. See all those tabs? Every one of those is a contradiction, where in one book of the Bible it says one thing, and in another book it says something else, completely different. Errors, meaning things that could not possibly ever have happened. And just utter effing cruelty by some God who's supposed to love us all unconditionally. By the time I finished reading this book, I realized, 1, there is no God. 2, certainly not the Christian God. And 3, even if he exists, there's no way I can worship him. And as a Christian, that's so hard. I just want to give you one example of why this book is false. I encourage you to go look at a video that Matt Dillahunty has on the internet, and I'll try to find it, put a link in the comments, about how this book was actually put together. This isn't like every religious book is. They're not inspired by God or anything like that. They're put together to explain a world that people 2,000 years ago didn't understand, and to control women. The majority of religious texts, when it comes to women, tell us we're second class, We're not equal. We're not worthy. We're to be controlled. And we have less rights than men. So one of the stories in this Bible that a lot of people really remember and cling to as evidence of God's love is the story of Exodus, of how Moses freed the Jewish slaves in Egypt and took them across the desert, 40-year journey. In fact, Moses didn't live to see the end of this journey. He died along the way to the Promised Land. Now, I liked this story as a kid because it showed me the perseverance of someone who had such faith in God that even when things got rough and when others around were doubting, Moses just said, no, this is the truth. This is the way. This is what God has told us. And I believe this, and we have to keep going. And so I loved this story as a kid. But when I investigated it, here's what I learned. The Egyptians never had Jewish slaves. The journey that Moses supposedly took people on in the desert for 40 years, even if you were to walk it today, 2 weeks max. And the third thing is, there's no freaking evidence that this ever happened because they left nothing in the desert. People living in a desert for 40 years would have left burial grounds, pottery shards, remnants of shelters that they built. How can you explain how probably up to 1 million people is what I've heard, could have lived for 40 years in the desert, and there's no evidence of it? It never happened. So that was kind of like the nail in the coffin for my Christian faith. So when I deconverted officially, it was hard. I was depressed, I was sad, I was lonely, and I felt like I really lost something special. But over the months afterwards, I started to realize there was a huge community of people just like me online. And I started to connect with them, share stories, private Facebook groups with people that are ex-Christians or ex-believers of any kind. And I just realized there's so many people like me that now want proof of something before they say, yes, I believe that. And I see people online who are Christians still posting different things, and sometimes I'll question them or I'll sort of say, well, did you think about it this way? I ask the questions now of Christians that I wish someone would ask me, because there's a lot of things that are crazy in religion, and we believe them because we've always believed them. People tell us the truth, and we feel guilty if we don't believe them. But what I would encourage anyone to do is just ask for proof of something. Ask for evidence. It's the best way to be in this world, is to say, oh, that's an interesting theory. You've got some evidence for that. Whether it comes to religion or science or whatever. My life is much happier now. I see the world in a different way. Blinders are off. And I really understand human nature so much better now as an atheist than I ever did as a Christian believer. And that's about it. That's my journey. And I look forward to your comments.